Yeah, I'm actually doing pretty good now. I'm surprised how well we are doing in the home office and how good Klang adapted to the new situation because of Corona and everything. But there's one big advantage now. Actually, not commuting to work frees up a lot of time for me in the evening that I can spend with my newborn son. I am a member of a team called DevX. We are basically responsible for improving and managing the developer experience at Klang. This includes like continuous integration, continuous deployment, automation, and tools development. We basically try to automate boring jobs one has to do over and over again, just to take the burden of every developer in the company. Also, a big part of my work is automatic testing, besides integration tests and unit tests, which make sure that the game is working properly. I am working on something called automated stress and load test. So what that basically means is we have a constant set of in-game scenarios which are automatically run every day, and we gather the performance metrics out of that. You can easily figure out if you have a regression in performance or something is not working correctly in the game, and just to keep performance, the experience for the player, like on a constant quality level and on a good level. I'm a tiny little bit older than the average employee at Klang. For me, it started quite early, like in the beginning of the early 90s. I was in third grade when I joined the computer science club, and we had that small little computer lab in my school. We had a bunch of Commodore C64 computers there. You know, those ones you can attach to a TV set. It actually was a black and white TV set back then, and with the tape drives. And I started developing little fun games out of ASCII art, shooting rockets and spaceships, and like a small racing game. In 1997, I got my first own personal computer, which back then was with Windows 95. It only had 120 megahertz and 8 megabytes of memory. From there on, I pretty much spent every free minute I had on that computer. And one of the first games I ever had on my computer was called Duke Nukem 3D. I don't know if anybody remembers that game. I played a lot of Doom and Quake, which I'm not supposed to do, but I did. And I started modding those games. So a couple of years later, when OpenGL and DirectX was introduced into game development, I started developing little demos with those. So I created demos with waving grass and cube map reflections and real-time shadows, which was back then a real big thing, having those real-time in a game. And from there on, I started also creating my own little 3D engines. A couple of years later, I started studying something called computational visualistics, a mixture of computer science, human studies, and engineering in regards of game development. And once I finished my diploma, I started in a small game company in Germany, Hanover here, and we were creating a massively multiplayer online space game. It's called Black Prophecy. Yeah, it was a huge failure in the end. Definitely, the technical challenges creating a game like Seed. So Seed is not just a simulation game, but it's a 24/7 massively multiplayer online game. So that is a huge challenge. And actually, that interests me a lot, and caught my attention once I heard about Seed. The last couple of weeks, I was working on backend services, and especially on one service, which is called stats services, to get historical information from seedlings. Imagine you want to know how hungry your seedlings are, how happy your seedlings were the last 10 days of play. You can get that information from that service, which is then in the end displaying a nice chart in-game. So you can see like a curve of happiness, curve of every attribute your seedling has. Also, I was working on those automated load and stress tests, and I added a little feature for dynamic reports, all those tests. So we have a nice HTML web page which displays the results of those tests in the end, and you can go through dynamic charts and dynamic tables and investigate any problem of any system you like. What I'm working on right now is improving the so-called game data editor, which is an in-house developed tool for our game designers and level designers. This one is used to set up the fundamental values and the data and models needed balance and run the whole simulation of Seed. So as I said, I'm working on a couple of backend services. Some of the services actually have a web front end. So you can open a web page where you can see and modify data of the game and of our different services around the simulation. And one big thing that lately got introduced is something called Blazor, which is a framework from Microsoft for developing dynamic web pages. This framework makes it super easy to create a rich user experience on our web front ends, and therefore for our game designers and QA and whoever is using our services, makes it very easy for us to create super dynamic tables and charts and UIs in a very short amount of time. Really awesome stuff happening there. You don't have to even think about JavaScript, style sheets, whatever UI framework you're using before anymore. Then the main tool I'm using is called JetBrains Writer, which is my main development environment. Using that for everything C# related and programming related. And another tool I'm using is Visual Studio Code. I'm using that one for everything not related to C#. So we have two frameworks that we use to declare and provision our backend infrastructure. It's Terraform and Kubernetes. And those create the clusters and host the Docker containers we need for all the services around the simulation. I'm using Visual Studio Code to program those frameworks. As I said, Team DevX, so developer experience. So we are very much rely on the feedback of every team and also on improving everybody's lives on the company in regards of programming, development, deploying, and creating new features. For example, we are creating the tools every developer uses. Let's say a BusyVic editor, which is short for what you see is what you get. So designers and QA and other programmers can very easily create new content, add new data and new models to the simulation. So therefore, we are in constant exchange of feedback with all the other teams and rely on the constant input of them. As I said in the beginning, Seed is the most ambitious project I've ever worked on. So I'm around 14 years now in the industry. And I've never worked on a project that challenging and that ambitious. Imagine developing a simulation or a simulation game is always complicated because if you want to see if something works and the game is fun, you actually have to have all the components in place to connect to each other. So the simulation has to be kind of completed before you actually can see if the game works out in the end and is fun for the player. So that can take some time until you have everything up and running and test the game in a manner that you can say, okay, that's actually a pretty good simulation and all makes sense. And now imagine doing a simulation game that runs 24/7 hours, 7 days a week in a distributed environment. So just thinking about terms of tick rate and syncing time, load balancing, and sharding of the simulation across different virtual machines. This is super hard to do. I've never ever done something like that before. I mostly read books. That's always a good source of knowledge. Also watch a lot of talks on YouTube. You know, there are dozens of conferences around the world. You constantly get new talks from very smart developers on YouTube, which you can just watch for free. That's really cool. And also, I took some sessions on platforms like Udemy, which is like an online e-learning platform. You can get courses on everything like playing guitar, learn to ski, but you can also learn something like programming. And that's really cool because Udemy is also a really nice platform. But the third and most important source of knowledge for me is my peers. So being in a constant exchange with my peers and colleagues is very awesome and always extends my knowledge and improves my skills a lot. Yeah, sure. Besides just using Udemy or YouTube, I'm regularly consulting Stack Overflow and the Unity Forum. Great source of knowledge there. From time to time, I'm reading posts on Gamma Sutra, also a great page on everything related to game development. Recently, I read a couple of books on clean code and clean codings by an author named Robert C. Martin, or short Uncle Bob, which I can highly recommend. It's really cool books. Learned a lot out of there and get a lot of inspiration for my day-to-day work. Yeah, I used to join Unite for a couple of years now. So I've been there on a regular basis, but not the last year. We have a newborn son, was born last year, so I was not able to attend Unite as my son was born in that week. But I still try to watch YouTube videos and take courses on Udemy just to stay up to date. Yeah, we had a nice workshop at the company recently, which was pretty good. Yeah, I try to do so, but not as often as I want to. Yeah, hard question. Side projects, not right now. One funny thing is I used to develop little puzzle games, which I created as a present for my family. So I was creating little mobile puzzle games in Unity and gave them out as a Christmas present to my mom and my sister, and they're still playing those games. Another side project was something like a collaborative text localization tool I was working on last year. But that tool is just proof of concept, and I didn't have the time to continue on that. I try to play as much as I can, which is not that often anymore, but I used to play lots and lots of games. Besides programming and working on the computer, I spent pretty much every free minute I had on playing games. My favorite genres were open world games, adventure games, and shooter games. Still haven't finished Red Dead Redemption 2. My pile of shame is growing each month. But now, next week, I'm going on parental leave. I actually have the plan to finish all the Uncharted games on my PlayStation and finally get in touch with Last of Us 2. I said I read a lot of books, not just on computers, but also on politics and science. Social political experiments, not per se interest me, but I find it interesting thinking about it and reading about it. Actually, in Seed, we try to simulate a real society. You won't get that far in a real society, neither in a simulated society, if you don't collaborate and cooperate. Think about gathering resources, creating a production chain, creating a market, selling goods. That doesn't work if you don't work with other players in a society with other peers. So Seed is much like a real society. So I'm very curious about how that works out in the end and how players actually join forces in Seed. I'm kind of like an introvert, not per se, but from time to time. What I would do is like build a little cozy hut on a high mountain, on the peak of a mountain, close to the sea, so I can enjoy those really beautiful dusks and dawns in Seed. I would build a little wood workshop beside that hut where I would produce my own wood furniture and craft my own furniture and sell those goods on the market. That's basically how I imagine my life later after my career as a programmer. Like, I love crafting with wood.